Factorial notation. Well, in general, with factorial notation, it's n factorial equals n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 times n minus 3, and so on until we get to 3 times 2 times 1. And n is a whole number. Now, it's a little easier if we think about this as numbers instead of letters. So think of n factorial as 100 factorial. So 100 factorial would equal to 100 times 99 times 98 times 97, and so on until you get all the way down to 3 times 2 times 1. So the other important thing to note is that 0 factorial is equal to 1. Now, if we look at the example here where you have n factorial, I mentioned before that when you're counting down, you can stop at any point. So if that was 100 factorial, you could start off by going 100. And then the next one below would be 100 minus 1. And you could stop right there and put a factorial, or 100 times 99 factorial. Let's look at example number 1. So n factorial is the same as what times n minus 1? Well, the number that's before n minus 1 is just the n. Let's look at B. Now we have n minus 2 factorial. If we want to write it out, we would have to think of, well, let's say that n was 8. So 8 plus 2 factorial is our starting point. Or it's like saying 10 factorial is our starting point. Then 10 factorial would be 10 times 9 times 8. And I could put a factorial there. So 8 plus 2 factorial is the same as 8 plus 2, where we start, times 8 plus 1 times 8. And then put a factorial. So n plus 2 factorial would just be starting at n plus 2. Then 1 less than that is n plus 1. And then times n factorial. So if you look at example C now, you could say, where did I start here? Well, I started at n minus 4. So something like 100 minus 4. So as if you were starting at 96, right? So if this was 96, and then this would be 95, and so on. So when I have n minus 4 and I'm counting down, the number that I started at would be, or the factorial would be n minus 4 in brackets, factorial. All right, let's go on to example 2. So when I'm trying to simplify an expression, usually I want to either expand out the top or expand out the bottom. Now try to pick the one that's bigger. So n plus 2 is bigger than n. So I'm going to start by going n plus 2 times n plus 1 times n factorial. I'll end there because on the bottom I have n factorial. Then I can cancel out my n factorial with my n factorial. And I can write this as n plus 2 times n plus 1. And it says leave the answer in product form where appropriate. So that's what it means. Let's look at the second one, B. Which one is bigger, n minus 2 or n minus 1? Well, if it was 100 minus 2, that'd be 98. 100 minus 1 would be 99. So I'm going to start off by expanding the bottom out. So n minus 1 times n minus 2. So now you can see I'm matching the top, so I'm going to stop right there. The numerator is n minus 2 factorial. So now you can see that I can cancel out. So I'm left with 1 up top and 1 on the bottom. So in the numerator now I have 1, and in denominator I have n minus 1. So you can see that my answer has no factorials in it, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. Let's look at one more example. Example 3, algebraically solve the equation. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start by expanding out the bigger one, which is the top, n factorial. So I have n times n minus 1 times n minus 2 factorial. On the bottom I have n minus 2 factorial, and this equals 42. So I can cancel the factorial with the factorial, and now I have n times n minus 1 equals 42. Now when I distribute this n into the n and into the negative 1, I'm going to get n squared minus 1n equals 42. And in math, when a squared occurs on a variable, then we get what's called a quadratic equation. And we want to solve these by moving everything over to the side where the n squared is. So I'm going to subtract 42 from this side and subtract 42 from this side. So now I'm going to have n squared minus 1n minus 42 equals 0. Then, to solve this quadratic equation, we're going to factor. So I can break that trinomial down into two factors, n plus 6 and n minus 7. So n you can FOIL just to double check that you got it right. So n times n was the n squared, n times the negative 7 was negative 7n, 6 times the n was 6n, so negative 7n and 6n is negative 1n, and finally the 6 times the 7 gives us 42. So the solution for this is n equals negative 6. Or for the second one, n equals 7. But because we want the n to be a whole number, this one we're going to reject because it's a negative. So the answer for this equation is n equals 7.